welcome back to your text connections lesson. This is the last one for this week. So we've already talked about our linking text, and remember that text is anything that we've read, and we've already talked about text to self, which is something that reminds you of your own life, text to text, which is something that reminds you of another book, and then we have text to world, which we are talking about today. And remember, text to world is when you think of something happening in the world, like an event or a place in the world, something that's from the real world. So maybe you've seen something on the news, maybe something that's happening in the world right now, you can relate to it or link it to that, okay? So questions that you can ask is, how does this remind me of the real world? How is this text similar to things happening in the real world? How is this text different from things that are happening in the real world? Or can I have a part that is, have I been reading something that is related to the world around me? Okay, so let's start with some practice before you go ahead and do it. Allie and her family stared up at the moon. Slowly, they watched as the shadow of the earth moved across the giant white circle. Soon the moon was completely covered and the sky was dark. That's a lunar eclipse, said her father. Awesome, Allie replied. Okay, so they're looking at the moon and they're thinking of a lunar eclipse. Okay, now I remember a lunar eclipse in 2018 and everyone had to wear goggles to protect their eyes while they watched it. Okay, you could also say that it reminds you of somebody who lived in the real world, which is Galileo, and he is a famous astronomer who liked to look at the moon and stars. So maybe it could be a time that there was a lunar eclipse that you remember. Maybe this even reminds you of when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. I don't think any of you were alive then because it happened a long time ago, but maybe, you know, that is something that happened in the real world. So you could link it, remember, just to the moon or the earth. Maybe you're thinking about how SpaceX, they went up to the space station just recently. Well, you know what? They could see the earth and they could see the moon up there. So it could be anything. Remember, you link it to whatever reminds you of, but today, instead of talking about yourself or another book, you're linking it to things that are happening in the world. So up next, Cody's class went on a field trip to the zoo to see an unusual exhibit. Giant pandas from China were there for a special visit. Cody watched as one of the pandas nibbled on the long piece of bamboo. He wondered if the pandas would be happier in the forest in China rather than in a cage at the zoo. So what does this remind you of? Okay, so it could be that you've seen giant pandas in the zoo, and maybe giant pandas made a special visit to a zoo near you, okay? Or you could say that it could remind you of a global organization that worked to keep animals free and in the wild and protected and out of zoos. So remember, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as the story. It just has to remind you of something that's happening in the world. So he was thinking about that animals should live in a forest and not in a cage. So maybe he's thinking of, oh, I know an organization that helps animals do this. Okay? So remember, we have good answers, we have better answers, and we have best answers that are very descriptive and include parts of the text that we are looking at and very detailed answers of what it reminds us of. Okay? So you have, again, level 1, level 2, and level 3. Remember that level 3 is just doing your text to world connections. There are 2 task cards, and there's also a bonus. Okay? Now, there is one more activity, which I'll tell you about at the end, and guess what? Today you can send it to me. So here's the first task card. Elle worked in the garden all morning. She planted beans, carrots, and zucchinis. A week later, she noticed tiny sprouts. All summer long, she watered and weeded her garden. Her plants grew bigger and bigger. Finally, the vegetables were ready to pick. What wonderful looking vegetables, said her mom. I can't wait to taste them. Okay? So what do you think this reminds you of in the real world? Now, maybe you have a vegetable garden. Maybe you went to a special farm that they have in the UAE where they grow vegetables. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Maybe you've been to a special farm where they grow vegetables in the world, okay? So think about places you could have been where they have this, or even this could be in your house because it is the real world, okay? So have a good think about what this could link to in the world. Maybe they're growing food to help people who don't have any food anymore. So think hard about it. Maybe this reminds you of one of the countries that we studied because maybe they grow different foods, or it could just be something in the UAE as well, okay? Task card 2, Ian's school was having a food drive. Every class got a big box to fill with food. Kids were bringing canned goods and other foods that would not spoil to donate to the food bank. Ian's mom had given him food to donate, and so had some of the neighbors. The box in Ian's class was almost full. So what does this remind you of? Maybe something that just happened, maybe giving food to people who are less fortunate. That's normally what they do for a food drive. People who are poor and can't afford to buy food, this is what it's for. So maybe there's something happening in the world right now, also wink, wink, nudge, nudge, or maybe something that happened last month where you give people food as well, okay? So think about that and what's happening in the world and how we can link it, okay? Remember, try to come up with 1 or 2 things, and that's it. Now today, you should have already filled out your text to self on Sunday, your text to text on Tuesday. So today you need to fill out your text to world part. So remember, the book that you are reading or any book that you have read, you need to link it to what's going on in the world. Okay, so try to link it to something that's happening to the world. Now today, I do want you to send me this page, and it is going to be called the Text Connections activity. So in your portfolio, you can put it in once you've completed all 3 parts as your text connections, okay? And once you've done that, and you've sent me, remember to also send me your task card 1 answer and task card 2 answer, and those just go in the text to world activity. So text to world activity for those, text connections to this. And then if you do feel like doing a bonus, you just need to think of 1 story you have read, obviously a different story than this one, and think of something that made you think of something happening in the world, okay? And remember, this is bonus, so you don't have to do it. The ones you do have to do are this one, and I do want you to send it to me today, or by Sunday, please, as well as the answers to task card 1 and task card 2. Remember, just write down on a piece of paper, task card 1, what it reminds you of, and task card 2, what that reminds you of. And then please complete this page today. I will resend it again just in case you do not have it, although you should from Sunday. And that's it. That is your English work today. So again, if you need help, let me know. I know it's a bit tricky to think of some things, but hopefully you've watched the video and gotten some good ideas. And yes, please remember that this is due on Sunday, so you do have today and the weekend to work on it if you so wish. Although if you get it done today, then you don't have to do it on the weekend. All right, I can't wait to see what connections you have made.